Facebook's slow today.
Yeah.
Still waiting. Nope. It's doing something. Oh, there we go. You're live.
Ah.
I think we may have been live before I said we were live. Say more waiting kind of stuff. Okay, thank you. Hello, welcome to Rewriting Reality. I am Shiraz, your reality shifting specialist, author of that wonderful book, How to Rewrite Reality, that's over there on the side. And I am with Tammy Adams of Intuitive Understanding. She is a grief recovery specialist. And we're going to be talking about grief today and what she does and giving you guys some information on how you can deal with grief and in your lives, because it's dealing with it is not what you think it is. This is what I found while talking to Tammy, and now you guys get to get that wisdom as well. So first of all, Tammy, what the hell is a grief recovery specialist?
Well, that's a really good question. What I do is much different than what you would think of as in regards to traditional therapy when it comes to recovering from grief. What I actually facilitate is an education program where I teach people all the proper things about grief. You kind of unlearn everything you thought you knew about grief. I teach you all the correct information about grief. And then what I do is I teach you to identify the losses you've had in your life. I teach you how to process and complete those emotions so that you can actually step to the other side of your pain.
Okay. And I'm pretty sure there's a story that got you to wanting to do this with your life. So what happened there?
Well, if you had told me that this is what I would do, I would never have believed you in a million years. I don't go to funerals. I still don't. I don't go to cemeteries. I still don't. I was always that person that showed up about 2 weeks after everybody else left. So I'd be the person who would call, maybe bring dinner, maybe show up for a visit after the silence had kind of had happened. And I guess that's really what I do now is I'm the person who shows up after everybody else has stepped away. And how I found myself here was as a life coach, I was actually working with a client that was really stuck and unable to move forward. And somebody suggested that I look into this program. So I did. And I spent an hour on the phone with the company talking about what they do and what this program was all about. And I really felt like it was a fit with everything else that I do in my business. So I went through the program myself, which I think, first of all, is very important because I'm not just facilitating a program from a book or from how someone taught me to do it. I've actually gone through the program myself, and then I got certified. And while I thought it was going to be something that I added to my existing business, it's actually moved to the forefront of what I do. And the other things that I do just kind of bookend it with the life coaching and some of the energy work that I do. It kind of shows an introduction to the grief work, or else it provides a bit of a soft landing when they come out of the program. But basically, I would say most of what I do now is teaching people how to move to the other side of their pain.
Okay. That's funny because I thought you were going to go into some more detail and you kind of glossed over it. You said you went through the program. What was that experience?
What was like to go through the program?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, when I signed up to go through the program, I really thought I was okay. I've done 30 years of personal development work. I've worked with a variety of practitioners, each one of them filling in a gap for me, giving me another tool to be able to move forward through this. I really thought it was kind of going to be a moot point for me to go through this program. I was kind of doing it more out of curiosity and actually to experience it than to really think that I needed it. And really quickly into the program, I realized how much unresolved grief I was still carrying. And I think that was the biggest surprise for me. We're all walking around thinking we don't have grief because we haven't had someone close to us die, not realizing what the true definition of grief is, and that most of us are walking around with unresolved grief that we don't even have. And some of my grief went back right to childhood. It was childhood. There were events and people, relationships that stood out for me. And through the process, I was able to identify which ones felt unfinished and which ones were finished. And then I focused on the ones that just didn't seem to feel complete.
Okay. So if we're walking around with this unresolved grief, how is that affecting us? Is it just making us sadder? Like what's going on there?
I think a lot of our anxiety that we're feeling, that anxiousness, that just not feeling complete, a lot of it is coming from these unfinished, unresolved emotions that haven't been complete. Since I've started to do this work, what I've noticed is I don't think there is a TV show, a movie, a book, a play, a plot that isn't driven by unresolved grief.
Wow.
And this might be a good time to just talk about what grief is so that people kind of have a common understanding of what grief is as we go through this discussion.
Okay.
Grief is about an emotional loss. So an emotional loss of anything. So that could be a loved one. It could be the loss of a job. It could be the loss of a dwelling. It could be a retirement, that sort of thing. It's also the change in something that was familiar. So moving from public school to high school, getting married, moving to a new house, getting a promotion. All of those things are things that we consider to be happy, and yet they can fall into that grief category, which is why such a high percentage of lottery winners end up losing all of their money, and most cases ended up in a worse place they were than before they won the money, because they never went through that grieving process of adjusting to a new way of being. Grief almost always falls in one of three categories. It's the things that we wished had been better, different, or more. It's about those unrealized hopes, dreams, and expectations. And it's about the things that we said that we thought weren't heard, maybe things that we said or wished we had said that we didn't, or those things that we wished we just had another opportunity to say just one more time with someone listening. So if you take that whole definition of grief, emotional loss, change, and unsaid communications, then I think it makes a little bit more sense on how so many of us could be walking around with unresolved grief that we're not aware we have.
So many of us, from that definition, it sounds like just about everyone on the planet is going through grief of some sort right now.
Of some sort, yes. And it's interesting when people start the program with me, they're feeling very anxious, they're feeling very overwhelmed. Completing that first relationship can be a really scary experience because you're looking at it through a different set of eyes and from a different perspective than you've ever looked at it before. And yet, usually the reaction is after they finish that first letter, they start to embrace the motivation to keep moving through the process because they've experienced that lightness, that release, that understanding of how the process works. And they just want to keep going and going and going and going. So that history graph is clear and they're 100% here in this moment.
So if they go through that process, is that something you go through once, learn it, and do it on your own? Or is that something you go through every time something comes up that you really want to get cleared on?
The first time round, let me back up. The handbook is written so that someone can actually go through the process on their own. They can choose to go through it on their own, or they could choose to work through it with a specialist like myself. What I have found is even though the steps are very clear on how to work through the program, you're just too close, and I'm going to use your words, you're just too close to the story to have that observer's perspective. And so my experience has been that people will read the book and read the book and read the book, but never take the action steps in order to move to the other side of the pain. So eventually they'll call me and they'll say, what's the difference if I work with you or if I do it on my own? So then they choose to work with me and I teach them the process and I take them through those steps. And then when people are done, they fall into one of three categories. They may have a really good understanding of the process. This is now a tool they can use for their lifetime, and they just go off and continue to do the process on their own. Some people choose to do what I call kind of a hybrid approach. Some of the relationships they need to complete, they can share with someone they trust. But there's some that still are pretty intimate and personal. And now they've built a bond with me, so they want to continue that process with me. And then there's some who just like to have that support. And so, I might not hear from them for 2 or 3 years, and then something comes up in their life and they call me and say, okay, let's maybe work through this together. But the whole goal of the process is to teach you the steps so that you have the autonomy and the confidence to work through it on your own.
Just want to check Facebook. Oh, ACK, how's it going? Thanks for joining us. Got a bunch of people watching on Facebook. And I have a question, and I don't even remember what they all are, but everyone talks about you have to go through the 5 stages of grief. Now, is that true? Does everyone have to go through these 5 stages? How does that work?
So that's the best question. And that was my biggest learning, because anyone who supports people through any kind of counseling or therapy, myself included when I was a career coach, we are all taught the 5 steps of grief. And what I learned in this program is there is no reaction to grief that is so universal that everyone will experience it. And the 5 stages of grief that we're all familiar with, so that's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, were created by a person by the name of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross created those 5 stages for someone who had received a terminal prognosis. And the stages were designed to help them accept that their life was coming to an end. She herself said this was never designed to help grievers through the grieving process. And yet, for some reason, in our Western society, we've just latched onto them and embraced them, which is why they don't resonate for so many people. And if you just look at the first one, denial, no one has ever called the Grief Recovery Institute without starting the conversation. My father's died, my dog has died, my wife has died. So there is no denial. And the second one is bargaining. If you have experienced a loss, there is no opportunity left to bargain, to try to change the outcome. But if you've received a terminal diagnosis, that would be a natural step. I will do anything, just don't let this happen to me right now. So it's a really, really important question, and trying to move or support people through the 5 stages of grief is one of the things that keeps us stuck in our pain.
Okay. So that seems kind of crazy to me, because everyone talks about having to go through those stages. I know even when you lay it out, it seems so stupid. Like, why would you be in denial?
Yeah. And
okay.
What's interesting is I'm just doing some upgrading training with the Grief Recovery Institute. And one of the things they were saying is that sometimes they're asked to be expert, I guess, when they're developing a script for a TV show or a movie. Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting is most of the times when you're watching something in the entertainment field, they always refer to the 5 stages. Always refer to the 5 stages. And every once in a while, they actually reference it in the correct way. And I couldn't figure out why all of a sudden this one particular show was actually referencing how to move through grief in a correct way. And now I realize that they were probably one of those shows that had asked for some guidance from the Grief Recovery Institute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now we have some people online. If anyone wants to ask Tammy some questions, just raise your hand and I'll bring you up here so we can have a discussion. If not, that's fine. We're going to keep chatting away. I'll just be on the lookout for hands going up. So, and I don't expect it, because this could be a hard topic to talk about. But if you're brave, we can move on with that. So,
Shiraz, there's
yep,
there's one thing I'd like to touch on that kind of follows up on the 5 stages.
okay.
And those are the 6 myths that keep us stuck.
Oh,
There's 6 myths that we're all familiar with. And because we don't have the correct information, we tend to reach for them to find comfort and to move through our pain. One of them is our feelings don't matter. And so when we're expressing ourselves to someone else, people tend to have patience with us for a very short period of time. And then we kind of hear, aren't you over this by now? Like, hasn't enough time passed? Like, enough kind of already. And so what we're taught is that we need to grieve alone. So we tend to pull away from all of those support systems that normally would be there to help us because the people supporting us with our grief, they don't have any more training to support us than we do as the griever trying to sort through this on our own. Then what we do as we're grieving alone is we wait for time to heal this wound that we have. And time is a noun, it's not a verb. Time can't do anything for us. It's the actions we take during the time we're given. But as we're grieving alone and we're waiting for time to heal us, we start to believe that there's something wrong with us. And because that feeling is really uncomfortable, we start to get busy. We start to distract ourselves with all kinds of things that really prevent us from kind of looking at these emotions that we really don't want to look at. And while we're busy, what we might do also is reach out to replace the loss. So let's say your dog has died, you might go to the pound and get another dog. We're taught in high school when we go through that really big breakup to find another partner right away. There's lots of fish in the sea, go find someone else. And then the final myth that we tend to lean on is we try to be strong for other people. And with the work that you do, I'm sure you're aware of the fact we can't be anything to anyone else.
hmm,
But what we do by being strong is we deny what we're feeling. And therefore, we deny other people the same opportunity to express or explore how it is they're feeling. And a parent will do this very much with a child. They don't want to cry in front of their child, but yet they're concerned when their child isn't expressing emotions
hmm.
over the death of a parent or a sibling. So, in addition to those 5 stages of grief, I think these myths are also really important.
Okay. Well, we have a comment here. I never knew that some of the experiences you mentioned could be considered justifiable to be grieved over. For trying to resolve sources of grief, how does one approach them? One at a time and work through the points of pain to reach a place of acceptance? So, if you've got a bunch of sources of grief, how do you approach them?
So, one of the things you need to do is first, like you say, identify them, but then you have to identify which one is unfinished and which one isn't. And you do, as the question says, you do them literally one at a time. You don't kind of start, and kind of move through the process with each one kind of across the board. You choose one and you complete that process, and then you move on to the next one and you complete that process, and so on and so on. And what's really interesting is when you go through the program, what you think is your big loss usually turns out to be a surprise. And it's usually a crisis or a huge loss that brings someone to me in the first place. And yes, we need to complete those emotions, but people are surprised that it usually falls much further down the list than they expected, because our bodies store these losses in a very specific order, and we need to heal them in the order that our bodies have stored them. And if I use myself for an example, when I was 18 years old, I knew my grandfather was dying, and I went to tell him all of those things I wanted him to know. I was really close to my grandpa, and I really wanted him to know that. And when I was in the hospital room, all of my aunts and my uncles and my cousins, they were all in the room. And I didn't have the confidence to say what I wanted to in front of them, but I also didn't have the courage to ask them to leave. So I got up early the next morning and went to the hospital to tell him those things that were in my heart. And when I got there, he had fallen into a coma. And by that day, like the afternoon, he had died. I was 18. I was in my 50s when I found this process. I carried the emotions and the regret of not ever saying those words to him for 40 years, or however that is. And what I thought when I was in the program and I got to choose that first loss to move through, I was 100% sure it was going to be my grandpa. And I was so excited to finally be able to finish this and be able to set it down. When in fact, my grandpa showed up, 6 people down the list.
Oh,
And
wow.
yet, all my life, he had been the one, that major regret that I had always focused on. And yes, it still needed to be completed and I needed to work through those emotions, but he didn't show up on the list where I thought he would.
Okay. That makes me really curious if I was to go through the program, what would show up for me. But the other thing is you said, go through it and figure out what's completed and what's not completed. And I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, because if we feel it's completed, why would it even be on the list?
So, one of the things that you do when you go through this process is you identify all the losses you've had.
Mm.
And then you go back and you look at those and you're looking for that kind of intuitive hit of whether they're complete or not. So let me use an example. So when I put my grandpa on the list, I knew because that had been on my mind for a long time. He, of course, was married to my grandma and they had a son. And I was really close to all 3. And when I first listed all of my losses, my grandma and my uncle never showed up on the graph. And I was devastated. How could I possibly forget the 2 most important people in my life? But there wasn't anything really left unsaid with them. I felt okay with them. There wasn't something that was kind of nagging at me, something that was kind of poking and prodding me that, this just really isn't done yet. And so intuitively, you just are able to know, okay, there's still some stuff here. And over here, I'm okay. But yet, having said that, I'll have people go through the program. And as they're sharing their losses with me, my antenna goes up and I kind of hear them reference somebody that doesn't show up as incomplete when they start working through the program. And I'll bring that person back up and I'll say, I noticed this person wasn't identified. How do you feel about that? And they're going, well, I think I'm okay with it. And I respect their choice and we just leave it at that. But as they start to move through the process, they themselves go back to that one person that I had mentioned. All of a sudden, they decide to do the process on that person. And I would say 99% of the time, they're absolutely shocked at what shows up because there's a difference between being intellectually complete and being emotionally complete. If you think of a major loss, it's your heart that's broken. It's not your head. And grief is experienced 100% on an emotional level. So we can intellectually convince ourselves that we're okay and that this doesn't bother us anymore. But when you actually start to lay this out from an observer's perspective, all of a sudden things start to show up that you realize you really still aren't okay with.
Got
Does
it.
that help?
That helps a lot. Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So you've talked about the process and what people can experience, but can you give us an example? And I know you have to have the confidentiality about your clients, but could you tell us like what's a big win, one you're really proud of someone that's gone through the process?
Well, I can probably talk about this one because it's been spoken about publicly. So I don't think I'm diverging any confidentiality since it is a public story. But I think the most exciting one that I went through was I had a couple go through it. And when you go through it as a couple or as a family, you can go through it at the same time, but you can't be in the same room. at the same time, because you want to be able to really express those emotions honestly without having to worry about editing them or feeling bad for someone. So with this particular couple, one went through it, and then the other went through it, and quite a bit of time passed. They went through it successfully, no big deal. And one day, they came to me and they said, "We would like to get married, and we'd like to get married in your backyard. Would that be all right?" And
Whoa.
it was pretty cool, I have to say, because they were able to complete all those incomplete emotions of the past. And lots of times, what happens is if you've had a broken relationship with one or more people in the past, and those emotions haven't been finished or complete, then your current relationship is always filtered through those past memories. Because, as you know, with the work that you do, lots of times we can have an experience in the present moment. Your subconscious, it kicks in, opens the file, says, "Here you go," and it goes off. And now you're in a memory versus being in this present moment.
Mhm.
And so, one of the things going through the grief recovery program is you get to wind up all those previous, and I'll use your words again, those previous stories. You get to write the ending or bring the ending to completion. And then when you're here in this relationship in the present moment, you're creating new memories because they're not being filtered through the pain of the past. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It makes me wonder if this is something couples should go in right after they get married and, and clear that up before they actually move forward with the relationship.
Yeah. I actually had someone go through it. And they really, when they first came to me, there wasn't a specific grief issue that they wanted to work on, but they'd had a series of broken relationships. And so they wanted to explore those, complete those, so that perhaps moving forward, they could have a different experience. They were very successful in working through the program, and they now are in a relationship that is really, really happy and very different from the ones of the past, because the cycle has been broken, so to speak. And when I started down this path of this spiritual learning, people used to say to me, "You'll have the same experience over and over again until you learn the lesson." And it sounded so punitive to me. Like, this spiritual path was supposed to be so loving and supportive and caring. And yet, I hope I can say this on here, but it was like I was getting hit over the head, like, "Dumbass, can't you get it?" I just really felt like I was stupid because I just kept repeating these. And one of the things that I've learned through grief recovery is when you look at the losses in your life, you will most likely see a pattern to them. And rather than a lesson, I see it more like the marshal on the runway. The guy who's bringing the plane in with the flags. And I see it more as an opportunity to heal the pain of the past, so you don't have to keep repeating it. And so it takes on a little bit of a different slant than the lessons that we need to learn that we never are able to learn. And, I think it also brings up something in regards to the fact that you and I've worked together. And we've worked together most recently, actually. I've healed what I think from a grief perspective, a lot of the stuff from my childhood that really has limited me from moving forward and really stepping into enjoying life. But I also know that once you lift the grief, you can clearly see what's left under that. And when we worked together, a couple of weeks ago, there were still some really deep-seated beliefs around what I had healed from a grief perspective that I still needed to kind of wrap up from a belief perspective. And that's what I find when I work with people. Again, I break them into three categories. There's the first one where it's grief. It's 100% grief. They work through the process, they heal their pain, they're gone. The second one is kind of where I felt. Yes, I got rid of the grief and I got rid of the pain. I was able to move to the other side of it. But I noticed that there were still some deep-seated beliefs that were still there that I've come to believe can be easily removed if we just take the steps to do that. And then the final group are people who, they've been in their pain for so long, that it's really hard for them to find a way to step back into life. And so they fall more in that coaching category where they need to learn how to step back in.
Okay. Wow. There's just so much to this that I did not expect to hear on the different categories, what you have to go through, what's underneath everything. And I'm pretty sure a lot of the people listening have no idea what's actually involved in grief. So, and just while we're on the subject, we were working together. We worked together first, we had a little breakthrough session in November. And from your perspective, what happened there?
And that was the one about my business, right?
That was the one about your business.
Yes. So yeah, that was really, really interesting because, like I say, I've come to know that if I'm stuck, it's a belief. And just like grief, you almost need somebody on the other side of that belief to help you see through it because you're just too close to it. And so I had set in my mind what I thought my monthly schedule should look like. And it was really funny because I couldn't quite reach that number. And so I came to you to find out why I can't just reach that number that I wanted to reach. When in fact, it was, I think through all the discovery of our conversation, I couldn't reach that number because that number was limiting. And why did it have to be that number? Why couldn't it just be open to whatever showed up? And I was always in this position to be able to say yes or no. And during that, I think one of the beliefs that came up was I was afraid to move past that number because that in my mind was a manageable number. And what if I had to say no to someone who needed my help? And it was that belief system that, I couldn't let anyone down and I had to help everyone. And so as we worked through those beliefs, being able to clear them and be in this place where I could choose, I could take on another client, I could take on another 5 clients, I could refer them to someone else, I could create a waiting list. But as soon as that belief was lifted, there was this flow that entered into my business. And I knew when I contacted you, I was restricting it, but I didn't know how to get to the other side of that. And so, now I am in that flow. And the other thing we talked about business wise in this last session that we did was this business grief recovery tends to have ebbs and flows. Yeah. And we talked about that. And I think I had just accepted there was an ebb and flow instead of just allowing the ebb and flow or no ebb and flow at all. But again, it was that narrative that because historically that's the way the business had ran, I had just embraced that belief that there would be highs and lows, busy periods, quiet periods, when in fact, why can't it just be? And those are the things that show up once the grief gets lifted, is being able to really see what's left. Oh, okay. And then just being able to take the steps to be able to move again to the other side of the beliefs, just like you've moved to the other side of the pain. I'm taking this philosophy course right now. And what I think is really interesting is the last philosopher that I have studied is Buddha. And Buddha's philosophy is based on the fact that suffering is a choice. And we don't have to suffer. Yes, things happen that we don't want to happen or we wished hadn't happened. But remaining stuck in that suffering is a choice. And I think that's what I've learned with grief recovery as well. You can choose to move to the other side of this, and it's not being disrespectful to the person you've lost. It doesn't mean you'll forget them. It doesn't mean that you're moving on, so to speak. It just means that you're able to process those emotions, because grief is normal and natural, and it was never meant to be a destination. They've
Okay.
just made it seem heroic, or what's the word I want? It's something to be admired. You know,
Mhm.
suffering should be admired, or can be admired, when in fact it takes more courage to move to the other side of it. But then if you've got children or friends, family, if you're an employee, if you're a boss, it doesn't matter. You are able to do that job much better if you take care of the pain that's lying under the surface.
And it's amazing because we get taught exactly what you're saying through movies and shows. And the hero has been grieving for all his life for his lost love. And that's why he's dedicated his life to helping people, because he just can't get past that grief. And what you're saying is, well, you can get past the grief and still help a whole bunch of people without all that suffering going on. So,
Exactly. And you can do it much better because now you're an experiential teacher. You've
mm,
gone through the process, and you can show them that it's possible to come out the other side, rather than just tell them there's a way to the other side. And I can see that even as a life coach, I'm much better at my job now that I've done this grief recovery program, because I've taken care of those obstacles that I've been carrying for so long. And does it mean that it's the one fix for everything? No. Does it mean that there's no other work to be done? Absolutely not. Other grief is going to show up, other work is going to show up. But what it does with each modality you reach for, each practitioner you reach for, each step that you choose to take on your own journey, I feel just makes you that much better at what your life work is, because you're not bringing all that baggage into the session that you're doing with your client.
oh yeah. And the less baggage you have going into a session, the better the session is going to be for both of you. Because just from what I know and what I teach, you've got your stories, and your stories are contagious. So you bring your stories of grief in, that's going to affect the person, like not necessarily if you're doing grief recovery, but whatever you're doing, you're bringing your grief into that session and they may buy it from you. So yeah, clearing all this stuff out is a wonderful way to clear things up and make you better at what you do. And it's not only if you're counseling, you can do in any profession that
Any
you're in, right? So
Well, and even you look at a manager or supervisor, you know, if they're carrying a lot of grief, a lot of unresolved pain, then in order to distract themselves from that pain, they're going to be a much different manager than they would be if they had taken care of their own. And, you know, I keep catching the book behind you out of the corner of my eye. And, you know, I've got that book. I've read the book. I think it's brilliant. It takes a complex, you know, subject and makes it very simple to understand. But sometimes I reach for that book because it's hard for me to explain a concept to a client in regards to how grief can be affecting every decision they make in life. And there's some really good examples in that book of someone who has formed a belief based on their pain and loss. And therefore, much like I'd mentioned earlier, that pattern just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. And so once you resolve that grief, then there's no need to repeat that pattern. And if that belief's still there, well, okay, let's clear that too. And you know, now you're able to go on and create a different experience.
nice. What's actually amusing is sometimes I'm stuck on how to explain something. I'm like, let me just read from my own book. It's just easier that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, the one that stands out, and I might mess it up a bit, so correct me if I get it wrong, but I believe there was a girl in foster care and it had not been a happy experience. And so her definition of love was pain.
Abandonment.
Abandonment. Okay,
Yes.
that's what it was. And so if a relationship she was in supported that belief system, then even though it was unpleasant, it was familiar. But if
Yes.
she got into a relationship that was something different, that probably would have been good, you know, for her to experience, it it conflicted with her definition of love. So therefore she had to find a way to sabotage it. And, and that's what our stories do. And, I've seen so many people say, well, I'll just do it on my own. Okay, fine. But I know myself, I can't do it on my own because I'm just too close.
Yeah, and it's the same thing here. If something's really stuck for me, there's no way I'm going to figure it out. I know that. So I go to someone else I know I can trust to see the beliefs that are there, and we can get those things changed, or just at least get me an awareness of like, oh, is that what's going on? Okay. I never thought that's what was going on.
Exactly. And I know when I work with you, it's like, we'll start and then you'll ask me if I'm willing to let that go. And I'll say yes. And if it's not true, you'll call me out on it. And sometimes we have to keep digging because what I thought was the original belief actually is 2 or 3 layers deep. And so we've got to keep exploring until we get to that. I think, though, what you do and what I do, one of the benefits to the people who choose to access our services is it's not a long, painful, drawn out process. What I do moves them through this process very quickly. What you do moves them through the process very quickly. And I think a lot of times people have resistance to kind of doing this inner work because they feel that it's just going to be so much work and it's just going to be so awful. And I know with my grief work, you do need to feel that uncomfortableness in order to move to the other side of it. But I'm not asking you to be in that uncomfortableness for months or years. We're in that uncomfortableness for a matter of weeks, and then you're on the other side of it. And, if people take anything away from our conversation today, I hope it's that. Healing, moving through this stuff. Yes, it can be unpleasant, but it doesn't have to be unpleasant for a long, long time,
Well, that is more so true for you than for me, because with me, it is this variation. There are people that are ready to just let go of stuff and they can have that instant transformations. Like with you, with the block on your business, you'd broken your number by that afternoon. Like it was done. And for a lot of people that come through, they're having the shifts and they're seeing it. But there are some people that come through and I will state, well, this is what you need to change. And they're like, absolutely, absolutely. And they will just refuse to. They will lock it in so hard. And so it just goes on and on. And I won't talk about specific clients, but I did do this with a friend of mine. And it was on a formal session, but she called me and she'd say, so this is what's happening at work and I'm very upset about it and I don't know what to do. And I said, well, the problem is you are too much worried about what people think of you and how it looks like you're doing your job than that you're not actually doing your job. You're just too worried about what it looks like. So stop worrying about what it looks like and just do your job and everything will work out. And she's like, oh my God, you're right. That's exactly what I'm doing. And then she called me the next month. She goes, things are going bad at work. And she explained it. I go, well, here's the problem. You're too worried about what people think about that you're not doing your job. Just start doing your job and don't worry about what people think about. And she's like, you're right. Oh my God. And so we finished that conversation. Next month, she calls, same conversation. Next month, same conversation. 18 months, this goes on. 18 months. And on the 18th month, she calls me and she goes, I just had an epiphany. I care too much about what other people think about me at work. And I'm just going to start doing my job. And I'm like, whoa, did you just come up with that? And at that point, that's when she made the click. And then everything was fine after that.
But I think that is a really, 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 really important point because I'm coming at this from where I am in that point of having done a lot of internal work and being ready to make that shift. You're right. If someone comes to do even grief recovery with me, if they don't have at least 1% willingness to be responsible for the process, it won't work. And no one can go through this process unless they're ready and have it work. And that's a really, really important point because I'm coming at this from my perspective and forgetting that, everybody's on a different a different spot on the spectrum.
Mhm.
And how quickly you will move through the healing is 100% dependent on how willing you are to allow that to happen.
Yes.
That's a really good point.
Okay, cool. So I don't see any other questions. If people have questions, please raise your hand or throw it in the chat. But while we're waiting on that, Tammy, if people want to work with you, how do they get in touch with you?
They can get in touch with me by visiting my website, tadams.ca.
Can
And
you put it in the chat so they can just click on it?
do you want me to do that in
Yep.
just a minute?
You have to put the HTTP so that it gets lit up. And then I'm also going to put that into the Facebook Live.
I think I did that right. Yep.
Yep.
And one of the things about going to my website that is really good is it's not a sales website. It's actually an education website. There's ebooks, there's videos, there's text, there's all kinds of things. But I think the most important thing they could access on my website is there's a questionnaire. Now they can fill it out so that it comes directly to me, or they can download the PDF and do it privately. But it's a series of questions, yes or no. Have you experienced this? Have you experienced this? And what it does is it shows them where they could possibly have unresolved grief. So that's one way they can get me. Another way they can get me, I'll put it in the chat here.
But make sure you're putting it to panelists and attendees and not just panelists. I think you're just sending it to me.
Oh, I sent it to all panelists. What do I do?
Down at the bottom is a drop down. Right now it's set
Yep.
to panelists. Go down one, it says panelists and attendees.
Okay.
There you
Do
go.
I need to do the other one or did you fix it?
I did that for you.
Okay, thank you. tdadams@rogers.com. What they can do is they can email me if they have specific questions, or they can email me and set up a free consultation with me. And there's no pressure on that. Like I say, if you're not ready, there's no point in me trying to do some kind of a sales kind of pitch on you, whatever. But sometimes people like to just have a chat, you know, get to know me a little bit better, get to know a little bit more about the program, the cost, what's involved, that sort of thing. So, you know, they can either ask those questions by email, or they can email me and we can set up a face-to-face or phone conversation where they can learn more about what it is they want to learn about.
Okay. Thank you. Still not seeing any questions. So I think that's it from the attendees. Tammy, thank you so much for coming on the call. This was great. I already knew more from talking to you, but there was like even more wisdom just dropped here. And I'm still like, my mind is still going through this thing, like why doesn't every couple that's decided let's spend our lives together go through this process, because it's only going to enhance the entire relationship.
Yes.
So yeah, that's stuck in there right now. I'm going to be thinking about that all day. So
well, and you know what? I'm going to just build on that one just a little bit. We tend to look at the Grief Recovery Method program as dealing with unpleasantries, but it actually works with positive relationships as well. So my husband and I, we've been together since we were 17. I think we've been married like 42 years now. And we've got what I think is a pretty solid relationship. But we both went through grief recovery and we both have done this process on each other. And what I found is we took a good relationship and made it even better. And so I guess the other thing I want people to take away from this is it doesn't always have to be a negative. Sometimes it can be a positive situation that can get better when you kind of clear away the skeletons out of the closet. You know, one of the things with my husband and I is in high school, his best friend set us up and I was dating someone else at the time and it was prom. And I didn't want to break up with my previous boyfriend over the phone and I didn't want to cheat on him. So I had to wait till I saw him in order to be free to go to prom. Well, my husband at the time, well, my boyfriend, no, my classmate at the time decided I was taking too long and he took someone else to the prom.
Oh.
So I ended up sitting home the night of prom because I broke up with this guy and then I didn't have a date. And so we used to have this joke where we'd rattle the bones, the bones out of the closet. And that's the first time I've told the story since I did my relationship on him. And yet I can tell you with 100% certainty it has no power over me whatsoever. It's just a part of my story.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. That's that's an amazing story, actually. And just that I can't break up with him. So I appreciate that too, because I've actually been broken up with over text a while back. That wasn't good. So
Oh, I couldn't cheat. He lived in Sudbury at the time and I couldn't cheat on him, but I wanted to do it in person. And it was time sensitive, but yet I had to wait till everything played out as it should. And like I say, I sat at home prom night because I didn't have a date to the prom. So, that was always it wasn't really a point of contention with us, but it was always something I used to tease him about the night I sat at home,
Yep.
So.
Okay. We're getting a lot of thank yous and a question here. I was going to say, when I was grieving over my sister and getting counseling, it was still me that had to decide that I wanted to move forward and not wish for it to disappear because of counseling. Oh, okay. So he's making the point there.
Yeah, taking responsibility for that. Yes.
Okay. All right. So thank you, audience, for being here. And thank you, Tammy, again. We will be back the last Monday of, March, for another episode. I'm just going to lose track of all time at some point here. And again, last Mondays continues. Tonight at 6:30, we have another business workshop. And at 10 o'clock is a belief shifting and mindset coaching session. So if you are free, tune in for those. Those are free as well. And there are events coming up throughout the month for the monthly magic program. We are looking at, hold on, this just came up. Someone was talking to someone. I should have this memorized. Monthly magic. March is confidence and self-worth month. So there's going to be workshops and talks on that throughout the month. Look forward to that. Okay, that's it. We're going to sign off. Thank you. Be well, be aware, be magical, and I'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye. And